Welcome to the Deep Dives, where we sift through the information you send us to find the stories, the insights that, well, really matter. Today we're plunging into the life and truly monumental legacy of Dame Jane Goodall, a figure who spent, 6 decades, basically dissolving the lines between human and animal. Now, she's known globally as the world's preeminent chimpanzee expert, but honestly, that title barely scratches the surface, does it?
Not at all. I mean, we're talking about a whole lifetime spent deep in the Gombe wilderness in Tanzania. She pioneered research methods that, people initially just condemned. She faced intense scientific backlash and then, amazingly, pivoted to become this relentless global force for conservation, for ethical change.
It really is a spectacular story. It's this blend of hardcore fieldwork and, well, profound global activism.
And our mission here, really, as we unpack all these sources, is to get a handle on exactly how Goodall work just fundamentally rewrote that traditional view of humanity.
Yeah.
For centuries, we defined ourselves based on this strict, maybe even arrogant idea that humans were totally unique, separate, an unbridgeable gap between us and the animal kingdom.
Right, like we were somehow above it all.
Exactly. And Goodall's work, it provided this, irrefutable evidence that just tore down that wall. She linked ethology, anthropology, and this full-time global activism in a way nobody had even conceived of before she came along. She didn't just study chimps. She forced us, really forced us, to look hard at ourselves.
That's the core of it, absolutely. So, okay, let's set the scene a bit. Quick look at this gentle disruptor herself. Born Valerie Jane Morris Goodall, London, 1934. Lived an incredibly long, impactful life, passing away in Beverly Hills, California, just in 2025, age 91. And her connection to the animal world, it seems like it started almost right away, didn't it?
It did, yeah. And it started with this object lesson in kind of unconventional parenting. Her father gave her a stuffed chimpanzee toy named Jubilee. Not a teddy bear, right? A chimp.
Which is pretty unusual for the time.
Totally. And she often talked about this toy sparking her early, really deep love for animals, especially the great apes. And what's fascinating, and it really speaks to the sort of social norm she'd later just smashed through, is that her mother's friends were apparently horrified.
Horrified by a stuffed animal.
Yeah, they were convinced a stuffed chimp would give little Jane nightmares. But, that early defiance of convention, that became her signature move, basically.
It really is a perfect origin story, almost prophetic, for someone who just went on to defy every single expectation in the formal scientific world. Because, let's be clear, when she started her fieldwork, she had almost zero formal training.
Right. Pretty much none. She did eventually get a PhD in ethology from Cambridge University in 1966, but, and this is key, only after being granted this incredibly rare exception to study without having a bachelor's degree first.
That's a huge deal.
It's a crucial detail. I mean, getting into a PhD program at Cambridge, especially in a field like ethology, with no prior university degree, virtually unheard of. She was only the 8th person ever allowed this exception in Cambridge's history, which tells you two things, really.
Okay.
First, the sheer power, the undeniable novelty of the observations she was already making out there in Gombe. And second, the huge influence of her mentor, Louis Leakey. He championed her against the whole academic establishment.
So that PhD was essentially formalizing work she was already doing.
You could say that. Her thesis, titled Behavior of Free-Living Chimpanzees, it detailed those critical first 5 years she spent in Gombe. And this basically established her as the first of what Leakey famously called the trimates.
Right, the trimates. Goodall for chimps, Dian Fossey for gorillas.
And Brute Galdicus for orangutans, exactly. Leakey's vision here was highly strategic. He was a big-name paleoanthropologist, right? He believed that launching this three-pronged study of the great apes all at the same time, would give critical clues about the behavior of early hominids, our ancestors.
Ah, okay. So studying living apes to understand human evolution.
Precisely. For Leakey, the complex behavior of living great apes was like a vital window into human prehistory. And Goodall, she was the very first piece in that massive anthropological puzzle he was trying to solve.
So let's trace that journey. How did she actually get to Gombe? It sounds like a real leap of faith, fueled by this childhood fascination with animals in Africa, starting back in '57.
Yeah, she basically packed her bags and went to Kenya, stayed at a friend's farm in the White Highlands, got secretarial work, but, her real goal was finding a way into the African wild. which led to that famous move,
The cold call.
the cold call to Louis Leakey. Just called him up out of the blue to talk about animals, about Africa. Leakey, who was already thinking about a long-term chimp study, was apparently super impressed by her passion, her dedication. He hired her as a secretary first.
A secretary.
Yeah. Only after getting the okay from his wife, Mary Leakey, who was also a formidable scientist, did he lay out his big plan for the chimpanzee research.
And then came the actual expedition. July 1960, Gombe Stream National Park, which was Tanganyika back then, not Tanzania yet. But the legendary start to her field work, it hit this almost comical bureaucratic snag. Right.
Sounds funny now, but it really shows the constraints on women explorers back then. The chief warden, a guy named David Anstey, he was really worried about her safety. You know, a young woman, no formal credentials, alone in the wilderness. He insisted she had to have a companion.
And that companion was?
Her mother, Van. Mandated for safety reasons, imagine that.
Her mom had to go with her into the wilds of Gombe. That detail just speaks volumes about the context, doesn't it? Primatology in the late 50s.
Absolutely. It was completely male-dominated. The whole idea of a young woman alone doing this kind of field work, it was radical, even a bit scandalous to some people. And Goodall herself, she always credited her mother, Van, for providing the stability, the encouragement, and just the sheer physical presence needed to actually get the mission off the ground.
So her mother's presence kind of legitimized the whole thing.
In a way, yes. It allowed Goodall to set this unconventional precedent that really defined her work right from day one.
And that unconventional approach, it carried right on through when Leakey pushed to formalize her research. He got the funding, and despite her having no degree, sent her off to Cambridge in 1962.
Right into that PhD program at Newnham College. And her thesis, well, it documented those first 5 incredibly crucial years in the Gombe Reserve. That fieldwork really kicked off a whole new era, a new way of studying primate behavior, focused on the long term.
And that commitment to the long haul is so important here, isn't it?
Critical. Goodall spent, more than 6 decades researching one specific community, the Kasakela chimpanzee community at Gombe. That kind of time depth allowed her to see things no one else could. Multiple generations, complex social dynamics playing out over decades. Short-term studies just couldn't capture that.
And the discoveries from those early years, they weren't just scientific nuggets, they were like philosophical bombs going off.
Yeah.
Before Goodall, the big thing that supposedly set humans apart, the defining line, was tool use. We were man the tool maker.
That was the line in the sand, yeah. Rooted deep in anthropological definitions. And then, bam, everything changed. Thanks to a chimpanzee named David Graybeard and a stalk of grass. This was her iconic aha moment.
Tell us more about that observation, because it gets summarized a lot, but the detail, the actual mechanics are important.
Okay, so she watched David Graybeard meticulously. He was fishing for termites. He'd take stalks of grass, poke them into these narrow termite holes again and again, pull them out covered in termites. Classic tool use.
Right, using an object.
But here's the kicker, the huge scientific leap. She then saw chimps selecting specific twigs and then using their mouths and hands stripping off the leaves.
Modifying the tool.
Exactly. Modifying a natural object for a specific future purpose. That act, that deliberate modification, that's rudimentary tool making, not just using something they found.
And Leakey's reaction when he got her cable about this, it became legendary.
Instantly iconic. He immediately understood the scale of the paradigm shift. His quote was, "We must now redefine man, redefine tool, or accept chimpanzees as human." Just pow. A concise, powerful acknowledgement that the single most important academic boundary between us and them had just been obliterated by a leaf-stripped twig.
It just completely flipped our understanding of what it meant to be human.
Totally rearranged the furniture in the room.
And beyond making tools, her research uncovered this incredible emotional and social depth in chimpanzees, things scientists had always insisted were uniquely human.
Yeah, she detailed how chimps have complex personalities, rational thought, and this really sophisticated emotional range. You could see recognizable joy, sorrow. She observed behaviors that looked incredibly human. Hugs, kisses, pats on the back, even tickling, which is pretty high-level social play, right? Goodall argued these weren't just random actions. They were clear evidence of close, supportive, affectionate bonds that lasted their whole lives, sometimes over 50 years. This wasn't just instinct driving them. This was proof of deep, enduring, complex social lives, family structures.
But the picture wasn't all rosy, was it? One of the most shocking things, and apparently really painful for Goodall personally, was discovering the dark side of chimp nature. It challenged that sort of romantic idea that they were inherently, nicer than human beings.
Right. She went into Gombe sort of expecting these peaceful, maybe simple creatures. What she found instead was, well, shocking levels of aggression, systematic violence. She documented things like dominant females deliberately killing the babies of other females just to maintain their own rank in the hierarchy.
Wow.
And even occasionally cannibalism. These were observations that just shattered that whole gentle primate myth.
And this darkness, this brutality, it even scaled up into organized conflict, didn't it? The Gombe chimpanzee war.
Yeah.
This wasn't just individual squabbles.
No, this was something else entirely. It was 4 years, 1974 to 1978, of basically prolonged low-intensity warfare. It started after the main Kasekila community split into two groups, the northern Kasekilas and this smaller southern group, the Kama community. And over those 4 years, the Kasekila males systematically hunted down and killed the Kahama males, one by one, and females too, until the southern group was just gone, wiped out.
My goodness.
Goodall documented this organized violence in her memoir, Through a Window. It was the first hard evidence that organized, prolonged, fatal warfare, where the goal is territory and eliminating rivals, wasn't unique to humans after all.
That must have been incredibly difficult to process, both as a scientist and just as someone who cared about these animals.
Oh, absolutely. It was a massive shock to the scientific world, and yeah, deeply challenging for Goodall, who'd formed such strong emotional connections. And on top of that, the team discovered something else. Chimps are systematic hunters.
Hunters? I thought they were mainly fruit eaters.
That was the old belief. But no, they saw them organizing hunting parties. They'd hunt and eat smaller primates, especially colobus monkeys. Get this, they were killing up to a third of the entire colobus population in the park every year.
A third. That's significant predation.
Hugely significant. So the picture that emerged was just startlingly complex. Tool-using, affectionate, political, predatory, and capable of brutal violence, just like us in many ways.
And that complexity, it ties right back into one of the biggest initial controversies of her whole career. Her methods, her choice to connect emotionally. It flew right in the face of scientific norms in the 60s.
Oh, big time. She committed what was universally seen back then as the worst of ethological sins, anthropomorphism.
Assigning human qualities to animals.
Exactly. Scientific protocol demanded researchers number their subjects, keep strict objectivity, maintain emotional distance. Goodall just ignored all that. She deliberately named them. David Graybeard, Flo, Mike, Frodo, gave them identities, not data points.
But it went beyond just names, right?
Right.
The language she used to describe them was also seen as problematic.
Oh, yeah. She used words like childhood, adolescence, motivation, excitement, mood. Her critics were absolutely furious. They argued she was contaminating the data, projecting human feelings and stories onto animals, basically wrecking the objectivity of the whole Gombe study.
So the big question is this intentional break from the rules, the anthropomorphism. Wasn't she risking her scientific credibility? Wasn't the whole point of science then to eliminate bias?
That was definitely the prevailing view among her peers, yes. But Goodall's argument was different. She said that by acknowledging their personalities, by forming an empathetic connection, she achieved a level of intimacy, of trust, that purely objective observation could never get.
So getting closer gave her better data.
Essentially, yes. She became arguably the only human ever truly accepted into chimp society. And that trust let her see the subtle stuff, the long-term social maneuvering, the mourning, the politics things, a researcher just watching from afar with binoculars would completely miss. Her unique result, the proof of tool use, the warfare, that data eventually validated her method, even though it took the scientific community decades to really accept that, yeah, maybe empathy has a place in observation.
And because she named them, these chimps became famous worldwide. They weren't just numbers, they were characters in this incredible real-life drama.
Absolutely legendary characters. We mentioned David Graybeard, right? The gentle, Grecian male who first let her get close. Then there was Flo, the matriarch, motherly, high-ranking, known for her bulbous nose and ragged ears. Her kids, Fegan, Fifi, Flint, were hugely influential in Gombe society. Flo's whole family line was central.
And Mike, the clever one.
Right. Mike was fascinating. He wasn't the strongest, but he became the alpha male, displacing the previous leader, Goliath. How? Through cunning, through improvisation, using noisy kerosene cans to intimidate rivals. It showed intelligence, political strategy playing a role.
And then on the more intimidating side, there was Frodo, Fifi's son, known for being pretty aggressive.
Frodo was the ultimate reminder of Gombe's wildness. Yeah, he was aggressive. He attacked humans sometimes, including Goodall herself. It's a potent reminder that even with those deep emotional bonds she built, these were powerful wild animals, unpredictable, governed by their own strict dominance rules.
The naming was one big methodology fight, but there was another major critique aimed at the Gombe research, one that really questioned the nature versus the intensity of their behavior. The feeding stations.
Provisioning.
Ah, yes, the feeding stations. This was a huge debate. It went on for decades. The main critique, formalized really well by the primatologist Margaret Power back in '91, was this. Goodall's team provided food, like bananas, right, to attract the chimps, make them easier to watch consistently. Makes sense for observation.
Seems logical, but the critics argued that this artificial food source completely messed things up. It altered their normal foraging, it distorted their social relationships, and crucially, it might have actually caused or at least dramatically intensified the conflicts, especially that brutal Gombe chimpanzee war.
So the core academic worry
Yeah.
was all that violence, the systematic warfare they saw at Gombe, was it natural chimp behavior? Or was it something created, an artifact of the research methods themselves?
That's the heart of it, exactly. Critics suggested the food, all concentrated and easy to get, acted like a magnet. It packed the chimps closer together, created unnatural competition over this resource that would normally be spread out.
And how did Goodall respond to that?
Well, she consistently defended her findings. She acknowledged, yes, feeding did contribute to aggression, both within the group and between groups. But she always insisted it only amplified the intensity of conflicts that were already part of chimp nature. It didn't create the violence itself.
And she argued it was sort of a necessary evil, right? Especially in the early days.
Precisely. She maintained that back in the 60s, in that dense Gombe forest, without some provisioning, it would have been nearly impossible to observe, track, and document all the complex social stuff, the intergroup fights. It was a trade-off, a compromise made to get that vital long-term data.
What about other studies? Did research elsewhere confirm Gombe's findings or support the critics?
Well, the picture is still kind of mixed, honestly, which is why the debate never fully died down. Some long-term studies, like in the Gulugo Triangle or Tai National Park, they didn't report the same levels of really intense organized aggression seen at Gombe.
Yeah.
But then again, other prominent primatologists, like Jim Moore, for instance, they've pushed back against the critiques. They argue that similar patterns of lethal aggression have been seen in several other wild chimp groups, even where there was absolutely no human provisioning involved. So it's complex.
Given how serious the critique was, and with decades to reflect, what was Goodall's final take on using feeding stations? Did her view change?
It did, and it showed, I think, remarkable scientific flexibility. In 2017, she stated pretty clearly that if she were starting the study today, no, she absolutely would not use feeding stations.
Interesting. Why the change? Was it the social impact?
Actually, no. The main reason she cited wasn't the social disruption, but the health risk. She pointed out that back then, nobody knew how easily chimps could catch human diseases. The risk of passing pathogens back and forth, which is a huge concern in primate research now, made the practice unsafe, unethical by modern standards.
That willingness to look back, learn, revise her methods based on new knowledge, that feels like a real hallmark of her approach.
It really is, and that willingness to learn and adapt, it perfectly sets up the next massive shift in her career, doesn't it? Around the mid-'80s, moving away from just observing to becoming this full-time global advocate.
Yeah, that pivot point seems really clear. It traces back to that 1986 conference, the Understanding Chimpanzees one in Chicago.
Absolutely. She went there as a researcher, focused on Gombe, ready to talk science. She left, completely changed. At that conference, she just heard report after report detailing the catastrophic scale of deforestation, the horror of the bushmeat trade, the collapsing chimp populations all across Africa.
Oh, wow.
She said she realized she just couldn't stay hidden away in Gombe anymore, just watching. The entire species was facing an existential threat. She had to act.
It sounds like this sudden, profound wake-up call, trading her field boots for, I don't know, a megaphone.
That's a good way to put it. And starting around 2004, she devoted almost all her energy to this new role, spending nearly 300 days a year just traveling, lecturing, advocating all over the globe. And her commitment wasn't just talk. It involved building serious global infrastructure to back up her mission, starting with the Jane Goodall Institute.
Right, the JGI. That was actually established way back in 1977, wasn't it? Before the big pivot. What was its initial purpose?
Initially, yeah, it was pretty straightforward. Just support the Gombe research project, make sure that long-term study could continue. But after that 1986 pivot, wow, it grew rapidly. It became this global leader in protecting chimps and their habitats everywhere. And the JGI is really known for its unique model, community-centered conservation, particularly in Africa.
Community-centered, what does that mean exactly?
It's based on this core understanding. You can't save the animals if the human communities living around them aren't secure, aren't thriving, aren't living sustainably. Their fates are linked.
That makes sense. And one of the most visible parts of JGI is the Roots and Shoots program, right, for young people. That sounds really dynamic.
It's incredible and totally bottom up. It started so small back in 1991, just Goodall meeting with 12 local teenagers on her porch in Dar es Salaam.
Just 12 kids.
Yep. They're just talking about problems they saw right there in their own communities, environmental stuff, social issues, animal welfare. And from that tiny start, Roots and Shoots just exploded, became this massive global network. Reports said over 10,000 active groups in more than 100 countries by 2010. Its whole mission is empowering young people to spot local problems, environmental, human, animals, understand how they're connected, and then take action right where they are.
That approach, linking human well-being directly to ecological survival, seems perfectly captured by that TAG project, the Lake Tanganyika Catchment Reforestation and Education Project.
TACR, yeah. Or as Goodall often called it, just the Take Care Project, launched in '94. It's really the cornerstone of JGI's community-centered model. It directly tackles the huge problem of deforestation around Gombe National Park by replanting trees on those really degraded hillsides. But, and this is crucial, the tree planting is fundamentally paired with socioeconomic empowerment for the local people.
Okay, how does empowering people help save the chimp's habitat?
Well, think about it. If local communities have no choice but to rely on unsustainable practices like cutting down all the trees for fuel or farming on fragile slopes, they destroy the chimp habitat just to survive. So Take addresses this directly. It teaches sustainable farming methods, it offers microloans so people can start small, eco-friendly businesses. And critically, it puts a real focus on women and young girls.
Why the focus on women and girls specifically?
Because empowering them has this ripple effect. Take provided scholarships for girls to go to college, access to reproductive health education. The thinking is, when women are educated, when they have control over family planning, when they have economic opportunities, the pressure on natural resources goes down. That means lower deforestation rates, healthier ecosystems, and ultimately healthier chimp habitats. It's a totally integrated strategy.
That's way deeper than just planting trees, isn't it? It connects everything: climate, education, public health, conservation. And didn't the sources mention a collaboration with NASA? That sounds surprisingly high-tech for a conservation group back then.
It was totally cutting edge for the time. She partnered with NASA to use Landsat satellite imagery. This tech let JGI track deforestation rates, monitor landscape changes over time with incredible precision. And then they used that satellite data directly to help villagers in Africa actually see the impact of their land use practices. It helped them visualize the problem and then come up with effective local strategies to reduce deforestation, using space-age data for grassroots conservation back in the 90s. Pretty cool.
Very cool. So beyond the institutes and projects, Goodall herself became this incredibly vocal advocate, didn't she? Extending her ethical concerns way beyond just chimps, especially around diet.
Oh, absolutely. She became a longtime vegetarian and later a vegan, and she advocated for it not just for environmental reasons, but really centrally for ethical ones. She was deeply, deeply concerned about how we treat livestock. She wrote in her book, The Inner World of Farm Animals, that farm animals are highly sentient beings, far more aware and intelligent than we ever imagined, she said, and they deserve our respect.
She pointed out the contradiction there, right? Loving pets but eating factory-farmed meat.
Exactly. She called out that ethical inconsistency. People saying they love animals while supporting industrial farming practices that cause immense suffering. This was so important to her later life that she even co-authored a cookbook in 2021, Eat Meat Less, trying to help people reduce their meat consumption.
And her advocacy work led to some major policy wins, too, particularly for chimpanzees in captivity.
Yes, huge wins. She campaigned relentlessly against using chimps in animal testing, and she was a major force pushing to get all chimpanzees wild and captive listed as endangered. That goal was finally achieved in the U.S. in 2015. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service classified all chimps as endangered. That was a critical regulatory victory, giving them much greater protection against research and exploitation.
She even broadened her focus to global environmental law, calling for ecocide to be criminalized.
Yeah, she became a really prominent voice, arguing that ecocide, mass damage, or destruction of nature should be recognized as an international crime, like genocide. In 2020, she said the concept was long overdue. She argued that actually criminalizing large-scale environmental destruction could fundamentally change how corporations and governments respond to the climate crisis, the biodiversity crisis.
It shows this incredible arc in her thinking, doesn't it? From observing one chimp stripping leaves off a twig to campaigning for global criminal laws to protect the entire planet.
It's an amazing trajectory.
Now, as groundbreaking and tireless as she was, the sources do point out she wasn't immune to some significant controversies, particularly around her writing later in life. We should probably touch on that plagiarism incident with her 2013 book, Seeds of Hope.
Right, that was a serious issue and very public. It definitely impacted her reputation for a bit and, yeah, temporarily stopped the book's release. Seeds of Hope was meant to be this big celebration of plants, trees, their importance. But just before it came out, a reviewer for the Washington Post found that large chunks of text had been copied from various websites without any attribution.
And the sources were kind of weird, weren't they? Not typical academic sources.
Yeah, bizarrely diverse. The material was lifted from places like organic tea company websites, tobacco industry info pages, even an amateur astrology site, and famously, Wikipedia.
Wow, okay.
Understandably, this startled the publisher. Hachette, they held the book back initially.
That's quite a mix. How did Goodall herself explain it?
She responded pretty quickly and very apologetically. Acknowledged the issue right away. She didn't claim malicious intent, but put it down to her, quote, chaotic note-taking method. Said she'd copy info down, but then fail to record where it came from properly. She stated publicly something like, it was important to me that the proper sources are credited, and she'd work diligently with her team to fix it all.
So what happened with the book then?
It went through this massive revision process, really extensive. To fix the missing citations, her team ended up adding 57 pages of endnotes. That's a huge amount of corrective work. The book was finally released in April 2014. So despite the initial embarrassment, the focus eventually did shift back to the book's actual message about conservation, about nature and plants.
Okay, moving away from the publishing world. The sources give us some really interesting glimpses into her personal beliefs, her interests, which are surprisingly varied for a world-famous scientist. Let's talk about her spirituality.
Yeah, this is fascinating. She was raised Christian, Congregationalist, I think, but her beliefs definitely evolved over time into this unique kind of spiritual reverence, specifically for nature. When people asked if she believed in God, her answers were always really nuanced. She said clearly she didn't know who or what God is, but she believed profoundly in some great spiritual power.
And she connected that feeling directly to being out in nature, right?
Right, absolutely. She said that's where she felt it most intensely. In the forest, surrounded by life, described it as something bigger and stronger than what I am or what anybody is. She also wrote about this really profound, unexpected, mystical experience she had, not in the forest, but in Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris back in 1977.
In Notre Dame.
Yeah, she wrote about it in Reason for Hope, said that experience led her to believe in a guiding power in the universe. In other words, I must believe in God. But, importantly, she always insisted she saw no conflict between evolution, the scientific evidence, and her own deep spiritual belief in some kind of guiding force.
That's quite a synthesis. Now, for something completely different and maybe a bit ironic given her work, her struggle with recognizing faces. Prosopagnosia.
Yeah, isn't that wild? She lived with prosopagnosia, face blindness, the clinical inability to recognize familiar faces. Think about that, someone whose entire career was built on recognizing tiny individual differences in chimpanzee faces, who traveled the world meeting thousands of dignitaries, scientists, supporters, and she couldn't easily recognize their faces.
How did she manage?
She apparently relied heavily on other cues clothing, the way people walked, their hair, their voice, rather than facial recognition. It's this striking contradiction for someone who championed recognizing individuality in science.
And speaking of unexpected things, we have to mention her openness to the possibility of creatures like Bigfoot existing.
Right. This is a fun, kind of eccentric detail, but it fits her generally open-minded approach, I think. She publicly supported the possibility that undiscovered large primates might still be out there. Cryptids like Sasquatch, the Yeren in China, Bigfoot.
Did she actually believe they existed?
She said she was fascinated by the idea and would actually love them to exist. But she was still a scientist about it, acknowledging that the lack of any real physical proof, hair, bones, clear photos, was undeniably strange. But she kept an open mind.
Seems fitting for someone who spent her life proving things scientists thought were impossible, like chimps making tools were actually real. Maybe she just held out hope for more impossible discoveries. On a more down-to-earth note, after dedicating 6 decades to chimpanzees, what was her favorite animal?
Get this, dogs.
Dogs?
Really? Yep. She often talked about their loyalty, their unconditional love. Maybe after dealing with the complex politics and occasional aggression of chimps, the straightforward affection of a dog was appealing.
Makes sense. Okay, briefly on her personal life. Married twice, and both marriages seem connected to her work.
Yeah, her first marriage, 1964, was to Hugo van Lowick. He was a Dutch nobleman, but more importantly, a wildlife photographer whose amazing photos really documented those crucial early years at Gombe. She was actually Baroness Jane van Lowick Goodall during that time. They had one son together, Hugo, who they nicknamed Grub, born in 1967. They divorced in 1974.
And her second marriage?
In 1975, she married Derek Bryson. This relationship was tragically cut short when he died of cancer in 1980, but it was really impactful for the Gombe project while it lasted.
How so? What was his role?
Bryson was a member of the Tanzanian parliament and, crucially, the director of Tanzania's national parks, a very powerful position. His involvement meant he could actively shield the Gombe project. He implemented an embargo on tourism there during those really critical years.
Why was that important?
It provided this essential period of isolation, of stability, that helped maintain the integrity of the long-term research. Especially after the Gombe War had started and things were maybe more sensitive, his support was vital.
It's clear her impact radiated far beyond Gombe. Her cultural footprint is just enormous. Let's talk about how the world recognized her achievements.
Oh, the honors just piled up, reflecting how universal her impact became. In 2004, Queen Elizabeth II made her a Dame Commander of the Order of a British Empire, a DBE. Huge honor. She was appointed a United Nations Messenger of Peace back in 2002, recognizing that global advocacy role she'd taken on.
And the awards. Some of the biggest prizes in science and humanitarian work.
Absolutely. She got the prestigious Kyoto Prize in 1990, the Hubbard Medal from National Geographic in 95, the Tyler Prize for Environmental Achievement in 97, and later, the Templeton Prize in 2021, which specifically recognized that spiritual depth, the way she connected science and faith.
And wasn't there a Presidential Medal of Freedom, too?
Yes, awarded by the U.S. President in January 2025, just before she passed. And culturally, even Disney paid tribute. There's a plaque on the Tree of Life at Animal Kingdom, and it includes a carving of David Greybeard.
That's lovely. Now, speaking of popular culture, we absolutely have to talk about that Gary Larson Far Side cartoon, one of the most famous and initially controversial depictions of her.
Oh, the Far Side incident. It's a classic story. 1987, Larson publishes this cartoon. 2 chimps grooming. One finds a blonde human hair on the other and says, conducting a little more research with that Jane Goodall tramp.
Oof. I can only imagine the reaction from her institute, given the conservative scientific world she started in.
They were horrified. Immediately got lawyers involved, drafted this angry letter calling the cartoon an atrocity, demanding a retraction.
But what did Goodall think?
Well, she was out in the field in Africa when it happened. When someone finally showed her the cartoon, she thought it was hilarious.
No way.
Yes. She completely shut down the legal action. Later, she even called it her absolute favorite depiction of herself ever in pop culture. Larson, apparently mortified but also relieved, offered to donate profits from a T-shirt featuring the cartoon to the JGI. And Goodall ended up writing a preface for one of his later Far Side books. They became friends.
And their story has that perfect, almost karmic twist at the end, doesn't it?
It really does. Larson visited her research site in Gombe in 1988, and while he was there, guess who attacked him?
Oh, no. Let me guess. Frodo.
Bingo! Frodo, the notoriously aggressive male chimp Fifi's son, attacked Gary Larson. It's like this perfect little reminder. Humor and human connection are great, but Gombe is still wild.
That brings it all full circle, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And her legacy just permeated media, from cartoons to major documentaries.
Yeah, her life story was told in over 40 films, including that classic 1965 National Geographic special, Miss Goodall and the Wild Chimpanzees, and then the really beautiful, critically acclaimed 2017 documentary Jane. She even voiced herself in cartoons, appeared as herself on The Wild Thornberrys, and even The Simpsons in a 2019 episode.
And her influence keeps going, even through toys designed in her honor, reinforcing her as this inspirational figure for kids.
Totally. In 2022, LEGO released a Jane Goodall tribute set. You get a little minifigure of her, 3 chimps, a bit of habitat. And the same year, Mattel put out a Barbie doll of her, part of their Inspiring Women series, made from recycled plastic, dressed in her field khakis. It really shows how her story, her dedication as a scientist and conservationist, is now being passed down to new generations through play, cementing her place as a true role model.
She passed away in 2025 while she was actually on a speaking tour in Beverly Hills, age 91, marking the end of this incredible era that just fundamentally changed how we see animals and ourselves.
Yeah, the global reaction to her death was immense. Tributes just poured in from everywhere. High-profile figures like Prince Harry, Al Gore, the Canadian government, the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, everyone acknowledging the sheer magnitude of her curiosity, her ethical leadership, her lifetime fighting for the planet.
So looking back over this whole deep dive, it's just crystal clear, isn't it? Jane Goodall was so much more than just a chimpanzee expert. She was this philosophical force. She achieved this monumental thing, connecting the dots between human behavior and non-human animal behavior. Her fieldwork, with all the risks, all the controversies like anthropomorphism, the feeding stations, it just shifted the entire axis of ethology forever. She forced us, really forced us, to confront the fact that maybe we aren't so unique in our capacity for love or reason, or even for violence.
I think that's exactly right. And her enduring impact, I think it rests on that powerful synergy she created between discovery and action. It wasn't just the scientific breakthroughs proving tool use, complex social bonds that define her legacy. It was that decisive shift she made, becoming this relentless advocate, but doing it through community-focused conservation. She made the chimpanzees world relevant, immediately consequential to the human world. She showed that conservation isn't a luxury, it's a community necessity. And institutions like JGI, the global reach of Roots and Shoots, the empowerment model of Take Care, that's the living proof of her vision. She taught us our survival is absolutely linked to the fate of the natural world, starting right there with our closest relatives, the great apes.
Which leaves us with a really profound question to ponder, doesn't it? Building on Leakey's famous challenge that we must redefine man. Considering how radically Goodall redrew the boundary between human and animal, showing us how much we share complex emotions, tool use, even war, what's the next boundary? Based on all the non-human research happening now, what line are we still maybe afraid to acknowledge or afraid to cross? That line between us and them, it's always moving. And Jane Goodall showed us the courage it takes to look closely enough to see where it really lies, or maybe where it doesn't exist at all.
A powerful thought to carry with you, definitely, as you reflect on her incredible 6 decades of work and the lasting ripples of her gentle but absolutely world-changing disruption of science.